Record.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our Lake Protectors training. Um, we have folks signed on today from a bunch of different places. So if you would take a minute to introduce yourself in the chat, that would be awesome. You can let us know who you are and what lake or stream you are interested in surveying this summer. Or if you're just kind of getting ready to learn more about what the program is, and if that's something you want to commit to, that's a-okay too. You can just let us know where you are in the park. But we're glad that you're here with us today. So as you all are getting settled and introducing yourselves, I'll go through a little bit of what we do and introduce APIP. So this morning we're going to do a couple of sections, and we're going to talk about invasive species for the morning portion, and then we're going to go into more about the survey methods in the second half of the training. And we are APIPP, so thank you for joining us today. The Adirondack Park Invasive Plant Program. It's a program of the Nature Conservancy that started in the Adirondacks in 1998. We work to prevent the introduction, spread, and impacts of harmful invasive species across the park. It's a program that's co-managed and funded by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. And we're a small staff. We do all taxa. We're talking about terrestrial and aquatic invasive species on the daily, but today we're going to focus on aquatic invasive species. And we spend a lot of our time working with volunteers, businesses, governmental organizations, nonprofits to bring communities together in the service of protecting natural resources. So this is the team. This is the year-round team. We have Ari, who works primarily in the terrestrial realm. Myself, Anna Hardiman, I work with the aquatic invasive species. Brian is our program director. Carolyn is our conservation GIS analyst, and Sean is our communications manager. And this year we have three seasonal employees. We're working with Rhoda, Alexis, and Liv this summer. Rhoda and Alexis are working on the terrestrial side of things, but it's likely if you're involved with aquatic trainings and projects this summer, you may encounter Liv out on the water doing surveys and helping with other APIP projects this year. So we're really happy to have them joining us and helping us with our efforts this year. So, as I mentioned before, we have a couple of objectives today, and the first portion of this training is going to be focused on learning about aquatic invasive species. So, working through definitions, we'll learn about how aquatic invasive species impact the Adirondacks. We'll go through identifying features of the invasive aquatic plants that we survey for in the Adirondacks. And we'll work to understand best spread prevention methods to prevent them from becoming established in more water bodies in our beautiful region. And then we'll take a little break and then we'll regroup to talk about the survey methods. So, invasive species. Let's work through that definition. So, we have a couple of images on the screen here, and the first one is poison ivy. And when we talk about invasive species, we talk about them in terms of having to check two boxes. So, an invasive species has to be not native to a region, typically moved there by humans, and it has to cause harm to the environment, to the economy, or public health. So poison ivy, many of us would recognize that as a species that is harmful, but it is in fact native. So it doesn't check that box of being non-native and moved here by humans. The next species on our little chart is a tomato, and that actually is not native and it was moved here by humans, but it's not a species that we know to be harmful. And it doesn't become extremely well established and turn into a monoculture. In fact, they're kind of hard to grow sometimes, which is disappointing. And then the last species is the zebra mussel. So the zebra mussel does check both of those boxes. It's not native to this region. It was moved here by humans, and it does cause harm to the environment, the economy, and public health. So it's all of those things, and therefore qualifies as an invasive species. So once an invasive species becomes established in their new geography, they are able to interact with that new environment in a different way. So the natural checks and balances that the organism evolved alongside in their natural home system aren't present any longer to limit their growth. So they can really become a huge population quickly by growing and feeding and reproducing in a way that seems kind of out of control. And this can be due to it having a lack of predators in this new environment or parasites that used to keep it in check. It might also be that the invasive species reproduces by multiple means. So that's often a strategy that we see in successful invasive species, is they have many offspring or seeds and have multiple ways of reproducing. Um, and invasive species also, as a rule, tend to be generalists, which means that they can thrive in a wide variety of environmental conditions and exploit a broad range of resources. So they're not picky eaters usually, and they can be pretty comfortable even in environments that native plants may not find as desirable. And so all of these things combined can have a pretty large impact on native ecosystems. And that's why the success of an invasive species can be quite problematic ecologically. So, as an invasive species becomes established in this new environment, biodiversity loss is kind of the overarching issue that you see. This is due to food web disruption, there's decreased light and oxygen and space. And then other impacts include sometimes the warming of waters and eutrophication of a water body, and also the potential for introduced pathogens. So a lot of negative impacts as a result of the thriving of an invasive species. These are some images here that show what that can look like. So as you might guess, the ecological impacts have a direct economic impact. And it's estimated and probably underestimated that invasive species cost the US an estimated 137 to 147 billion dollars annually. So some of those costs are due to mitigating the impacts of impairment to recreation and tourism. But then the costs are also related to reduced property values, reduced water quality, and drainage and flood control. There's a lot of management involved with invasive species. So with that in mind, we kind of have an idea of what an invasive species is and why they are harmful. We'll go into the species that we look for here in the Adirondacks. Some of them are established and some of them are kind of up and coming species that we're keeping high on our watch list we don't want to see in the park. And we're going to work through the identification process for those species. And before we do that, we'll start with this image here. So you'll see perhaps a somewhat whimsical image on the screen. And I use this as an example because this is something that we have not seen before in person, likely. But if we look at those key characteristics, we can probably figure out what this is. And if you think you've positively identified this, feel free to drop it in the chat, just so that we can all agree and confirm. But most of us probably recognize this as a unicorn. So by looking at those key characteristics that we see in this very simple drawing, so we see the horse shape, we see the horn protrusion on the forehead, we can identify that this is a unicorn. Even though we haven't probably seen one in person, they're not known to be native to the Adirondacks. But the goal of the training today, when we're going through the invasive species, is to just work on getting those key identifying characteristics so that we can know what to look out for when we're looking at plants out on the water, and feel a little bit more comfortable recognizing those key features of the invasive species. All right, so this is our 2026 AIS list. AIS is short for aquatic invasive species, and we have 16 species on our target list. This includes 8 plants and 8 animals, and they're all listed here. We'll go through each one individually. And as I said before, some of them are already known to be established within the APIPP region, and others are targeted as at risk for introduction due to their close proximity to water bodies in this region and their profound negative impacts once they would be introduced. So we'll start with the plant section of our list. There are a couple of different types of plants that are helpful to visualize when you're thinking about identifying plants out in the field. So this image here is helpful to kind of break that down. Emergent plants are plants that emerge or have a large portion of their shoots or leaves or flowering structures that are out of the water. And those include familiar types of cattails, bulrushes, sedges. Lots of plants fall into the emergent category. But technically, emergent vegetation can refer to any wetland plant that is out of the water. And then floating plants are plants that have floating leaves. They can include water lilies, water shields. There are some pond weeds that have floating plants. There is kind of a subcategory of floating plants that are just the free floating plants that aren't rooted. So that includes duckweeds and some bladderworts. And then we have submergent plants. Those are the plants that have structures below the water. So common examples of that would be the milfoils or lots of the pondweeds. And it's important to notice that when you're looking at plants, they sometimes have a mixture of different stages of growth. So you'll find some of them are submergent for a time and then they have floating leaf parts. So it's these categories help us understand, but they're not necessarily the perfect boxes to put all plants in. Plants don't play by our rules. And then of course we have algae, and algae does not have stems or leaves. They don't produce seeds, and they have different structures that work differently from plant roots. They don't have a true vascular system. And along with that plant terminology, it's helpful to look at these basic terms that we use when we're identifying plants. We've got a couple of helpful categories on this slide. We have vein structure, we have leaf shape, leaf arrangement, and edges. You'll notice throughout this training when we talk about invasive species, a lot of them have toothed or serrated edges. That's one of the key characteristics that we look for on several of our invasive species. And then we have arrangement on the stem. So that's the way that the leaf pattern grows along the stem, whether those leaf stems are connected right opposite each other, if they alternate, or if they're whorled around the stem. All right, which brings us to our first invasive plant of the morning. So this is Eurasian water milfoil. This might be one that you are familiar with. It's one that is established here in the Adirondacks. It's native to Europe and Asia originally, and it is a submerged perennial that looks like many native aquatic plants, including native milfoil species. So we're going to dive in a little bit more to see how we can identify Eurasian water milfoil. This is the distribution map for Eurasian water milfoil. It's found in over 65 lakes in the Adirondacks, and it's our most common invasive species. So this distribution map that we're seeing now is pulled from iMapInvasives, and it's where people are putting their observations of AIS as it's located out in the field. And we'll go through the process of that in the second half of the training, but that's a part of the Lake Protector program is using iMapInvasives to help build this public database for AIS distribution. So Eurasian water milfoil usually has 4 feathery leaves whorled around the stem. So that means they're all opposite each other, but there are multiple leaves. They're not just 2 stems on either side of the leaf stem. So each leaf is finely divided. It has usually greater than 9 leaflets, and the leaf tips are really flat. It looks like they have been snipped off with a pair of scissors. The plant can reach lengths of 20 feet and branches often up near the surface. And sometimes when it reaches the surface, it'll grow straight across, and you'll see these long ropes of milfoil kind of growing horizontally on the water surface. Eurasian water milfoil also has tiny pink flowers that occur on an emergent spike in the late summer. So the key identifying features that we look for in this invasive species are those feathery leaves and whorls of 4, those really blunt leaf tips that look like they've been snipped off, and another thing you can test when you think you found Eurasian water milfoil is if you lift it out of the water, the leaves collapse along the stem. They kind of just turn into a really ropey sort of plant that doesn't hold its structure. So here's another image of that Eurasian water milfoil. You can see those whorled leaves and those rather snipped edges on the edge of the milfoil plant. And this here is an example of a plant that has been removed from the water, and you can see how the leaves collapse along the stem. Up next, we have another kind of milfoil. This is variable milfoil. And this is actually a milfoil that is native to various regions in the US, but not this area. So it's another submerged perennial. It looks like It has some similarities to Eurasian water milfoil and other native milfoils, but we'll break down how we identify this one specifically. This is the distribution growth of our variable milfoil in the Adirondacks. You'll notice it kind of has a different area of establishment than the Eurasian water milfoil. There is a little bit of crossover there, but they tend to grow in kind of a different side of the park, which is interesting. It's something that we're looking at. But like Eurasian water milfoil, it has a pretty wide distribution throughout the park. So variable leaf milfoil has 4 to 6 feathery leaves that are around the stem. And when I say feathery, you can see in this image here of the submerged leaf that it has a central stem, a central rachis, and then it has all of these little leaflets going from the sides of that stem in the shape of a pattern, like you would see on a bird's feather. And some of our other plants have a different pattern that's forked, and it just means that it's not in that same very uniform, symmetrical almost pattern of central leaf stem with little leaflets coming off of the side. It just has various kind of yeah, like tuning forks of leaves coming off of them. So with milfoils, you're looking for those feathered leaves. So just like a bird's feather. But some of the leaves on the Eurasian, not the Eurasian, the variable leaf milfoil, can be alternating, although they are a little bit whorled. The leaves are divided into 7 to 14 pairs of leaflets. The dense leaf arrangement of variable leaf makes it look a lot like a bottle brush. So unlike Eurasian water milfoil, this plant has much thicker, denser growth and holds its shape when you remove it from the water a lot more than the Eurasian water milfoil. Here's another image of that. You'll notice it also tends to have a reddish stem that's often characteristic. Sometimes it can be a little bit more towards a brown color too. This is a picture of the flower spike. So in mid to late summer, those serrated leaves with small reddish pink flowers are seen sometimes emerging from the water. All right. So another invasive plant is the fanwort. So fanwort is native to the southern US. And as air and water temperatures continue to rise in this area and across the US and the world, this species is becoming more of a concern and one that we're watching out for. So this is our distribution map right now. There is a confirmed population in the southern Adirondacks. It's in an isolated private lake area, so that is the only place that we've had confirmed or historic reports of fanwort in the Adirondacks, and we'd really love to keep it that way. So it's one that we really focus on prevention for, trying to keep it from entering our Adirondack water bodies. So fanwort is another submerged perennial. It has fan-like leaves that are branched and attached to the stem on the petioles. The leaves are arranged in pairs. They're opposite, they're not whorled. And the leaves, yeah, they have a different shape than the milfoil leaves. If you look in comparison to what I was referring to earlier as the feathered shape, you'll see how they're different in that they fork and that they are very fan-shaped. So it's a different leaf shape when you take a closer look at it. The flowers on fanwort are small and white, and they're known to emerge in the late summer, but fanwort is rarely known to flower here in our climate, and it reproduces by seed or fragmentation, which the milfoils also do. So that's fragmentation means that it can just be a tiny piece of the plant, a couple of leaves on a stem, and they're able to reproduce into a new and growing plant, which is one of the main ways that this type of invasive species travels, is little bits of plant fragments attached to boating equipment or trailers. So the key identifying features of fanwort are the opposite leaves on the stalks, the petiole that is attached before the leaflet starts, and it has that forked pattern. It's not feathered like the milfoils. So there's some good imagery of those fan-shaped forking leaves. And it's important to note at this point that there are a lot of great native plants that look a little bit like these plants. So here we have hornwort, which is also often referred to as coontail. It has that same forked pattern for the leaves, but so not feathered like the milfoils, and it's very stiff and bristly, so it has a couple of different characteristics than we'd see in fanwort. It doesn't have that fan-shaped leaf in the same way. We also have the common bladderwort. There are a bunch of bladderworts, different species here. They all have this tiny air sac or bladder that allows these carnivorous plants, which is quite impressive for them, to trap freshwater zooplankton, so like water fleas. And they also have that forked pattern, but they're not feathered or fanned. Plus, those little bladders are very distinctive. So if you look for those bladders and see them, you can feel pretty sure that you're dealing with a bladderwort. There's a close-up of those really impressive bladder structures, those tiny air sacs. And then we also have the water marigold, and they have a whorled leafing pattern. They don't have much of a leaf stalk, and it has that forked pattern that later in the summer they'll develop a yellow emergent flower. So there are some native species that are somewhat similar in their characteristics, but if we look a little bit closer, we can see how they are different. And on that topic, there are actually 6 native species of milfoil to the Adirondacks. We hear a lot about the 2 that are invasive, but we do have some great native milfoils as well. And these 2 here are the ones that are most commonly mistaken for an invasive milfoil. We've got northern water milfoil. It generally has less leaf pairs than Eurasian water milfoil. The leaves also tend to be a little bit stiffer, not quite as soft and collapsible along the stem. So that's a good thing to look at um, when you're looking at the milfoil and want to see if it has the characteristics of Eurasian water milfoil. And then whorled milfoil grows densely, it has kind of a pipe cleaner-esque shape to it and a different type of sepal or flower than the variable leaf milfoil. But these are the 2 that are most often confused for invasive milfoils. If you find these out in the field and aren't totally sure about the idea, it's always a good idea to take pictures and to still mark the spot so that you can visit again, and also keep looking at the plants around it and see if you can find a really good sample that you can maybe even bring back and share with us, because we'd love to see it too. We do enjoy looking at a lot of native plants alongside the invasive species. All right, we have water chestnut as another invasive plant species. So the water chestnut is native to Europe and Asia. It's a fast-growing, floating annual that can grow up to 16 feet in water depth. And we'll look at the distribution map of that. So right now we're not seeing much in the Adirondack interior, and there's a lot of historic work towards its prevention. So there are some larger infestations in Lake Champlain, some in Lake George, definitely in the Hudson and the Mohawk River areas, and it's something that we're focusing on making sure it doesn't enter Adirondack waterways, and then working towards that early detection, rapid response when it is positively identified and reported in the Adirondacks. There are a few lakes who have had small populations and they've been able to successfully remove them when they were in small numbers. So it's a strong case for getting out there and monitoring your lakes and noticing the invasive species populations when they're small. So water chestnut has a couple of different leaves. It has submersed leaves that are triangular and toothed, and it has floating leaves that are glossy. The floating leaf stalks have these visible bladders and commonly form this rosette shape that is one of the reasons they're here. They were brought over as aquatic garden plants because they have kind of a unique pattern when they're laying flat on the water. The flowers have 4 white petals that normally bloom in July. And then the most distinctive trait of this plant is the thorny 4-spine nutlets, which mature in late summer. So reproduction can occur by these sharp little nutlets and also from fragmentation of the rosettes. Here's another picture here to show what the underside of the plant looks like. You can see those 2 different leaf shapes and those unique bulbous bladders. So again, the key features of the water chestnut, you're looking at those large rosettes of triangular floating leaves on the water surface, those feathery leaves underneath, and of course the iconic 4-spiked nutlets. European frogbit, native to Europe originally. It's a free-floating annual. The leaves are often pretty small, the size of a quarter, and they are often found around the edges of water bodies. Kind of in this picture, you can get a sense for it among the emergent vegetation. So, like near the cattails. All right, and this is the distribution map of European frogbit. It's quite common in the Lake Champlain area, the St. Lawrence River Valley area, and there are a few places in the Adirondack interior that we're also seeing frogbit. And like water chestnut, it's definitely a species that we're aiming more for that early detection and rapid response in terms of monitoring for the species and managing it. Here is a nice close-up photo of what those flowers look like. So European frogbit has these small heart-shaped floating leaves. It has this very distinctive three-petaled white flower. There's actually a native frogbit that has more petals, so you're looking for those little three-petaled white flowers. And something else that's very characteristic of European frogbit is it has this multiple stem tangle when you lift it out of the water. So if you see a floating plant and it has these nice little heart-shaped leaves and you're wondering, you maybe don't see the flowers, a good way to test it is to just lift it a little bit out of the water and see if you're going to find this tangle of stems at the bottom. And that's a good indicator that you have encountered European frogbit. There are a bunch of other native floating plants, so we'll just kind of quickly go through those. This is the white water lily. It has a white flower as well with a yellow center, but notice it has many more than three petals. So that's a good indicator that you're looking at the native white water lily. We also have the yellow pond lily or spatterdock. It has much larger leaves and yellow flowers. We have water shield. This is an oval shaped leaf. It has a very slimy underleaf. If you lift it up, that's a good way to confirm you're working with water shield. And little floating heart. This is maybe the plant that looks the most similar to European frogbit, but the leaves are significantly larger, and they're still heart-shaped, but they have these little tubers underneath the surface, which are pictured here, and they have a single stem. So that's something you should look for when you're trying to identify European frogbit. If it just has that one stem, it's more likely to be a native plant. But if it has that tangle, then it's likely to be a European frogbit. It also has more petals on the flower if you're looking at little floating heart. So remember, European frogbit has three petals. That's not too many. All right. So another invasive species that we're keeping an eye out for and monitoring for in the Adirondacks is starry stonewort. So starry stonewort is actually not a true plant. It's a macroalgae, so it doesn't have a root system or a vascular structure. It has a pattern of long stems that are followed by a kind of like a branching radial pattern. It has lots of lots of branches. One of the key descriptors is this white star bulbil that it has, which is pictured here. So ideally, if you were to be identifying this, you'd be able to find that characteristic bulbil. So starry stonewort is often found near the sediment, and so it's found lower in the water bodies along the bottom. And it's similar to several other native macroalgae, Chara and Nitella, but they're generally more robust and they don't have this star-like bulbil. So looking for that is one of the key things. And if you find something that you are thinking, maybe this could fall into that category, it's always totally great to take pictures, mark that location, and save a sample. Samples are probably the best way to work through the identification process. So this is the starry stonewort distribution as of this year. It's not here in the Adirondacks yet, but it's found very, very nearby. So it's in the St. Lawrence region, it's in Lake Ontario, Oneida Lake, and even as close as Lake Bonaparte, which is a few miles from the APIPP regional border. So it's one that we are trying to keep an eye out for and trying to focus on that prevention piece to keep it from being a large part of the Adirondack aquatic ecosystems. So curly pondweed. Curly pondweed is our next plant. It's native to Europe and Africa and Australia. It has a unique life pattern. It starts growth actually during the cold weather months, and it's able to thrive and grow under ice. So it's one of the few plants that's already ready to go when the ice melt occurs in April. So it tends to increase in abundance throughout May and June, and then it starts dying back in mid-July. So it's pretty important to look for this species early on. So if you're out on the water surveying in August or September, October, you might not see this species because it's already gone through its very early growth cycle. So this one is one that we like to I encourage people to look out for early in the year to make sure that we get an accurate census of it because it's possible that it's slightly underreported due to the season of AIS surveys being as late as October. This is the distribution map of curly-leaf pondweed that we currently see. So it's found throughout Lake Champlain and Lake George, Schroon Lake, Lower Saranac. There are lots of populations in the larger lake areas. It is one of the top three invasive plant species found in the APIPP region, with the other two being Eurasian water milfoil and variable leaf milfoil. You can see from this map that it's definitely nearby on all sides, as well as being kind of encroaching into the park. So curly leaf pondweed, submerged perennial. It has these very rigid reddish green, somewhat oblong leaves, and they have these very distinct, finely toothed edges. So the plant's flat and reddish brown stem grows in water depths of from 1 to about 16 feet, and it reproduces most commonly through these winter buds that are called turions, which gives it the ability to have that alternate life cycle. So what we look for identifying curly pondweed are those kind of lasagna-shaped leaves. They're very wavy, and those very serrated edges, super finely toothed leaves, as well as sometimes you'll find the small, sharp pine cone shaped turion. There are lots of pondweeds, though, that are native and a great part of our ecosystem. So here are some images just to give you a little bit of context there. These two are some that look a little bit more like curly leaf pondweed. So the one that you'll see here on the screen here is the clasping leaf pondweed and white stem pondweed. Both have those wavy leaves you might notice that look a little bit like our invasive species of pondweed, but they don't have the teeth like curly leaf pondweed does. So both of these plants also live throughout the summer. They have a more standard growth cycle. So you'll see them during surveys if you're out later in the summer from August to October growing as well. All right, this is our final plant species, and probably one that you have heard of. This is hydrilla. It's kind of referred to as the perfect invasive plant weed, and we don't have it yet here in the Adirondacks, which is good because, as you can see from this image, it can grow very densely, and therefore it can be very damaging to native ecosystems. And on top of that, it serves as a good example of how invasive species can be a pathway to other challenges. And there's some interesting research in connection with hydrilla that shows that hydrilla is the preferred host for a native cyanobacteria, that in the presence of bromine, this cyanobacteria can produce a neurotoxin that can actually kill animals like turtles and ducks. And then if we're looking at the trophic levels, the eagles eat these animals and they have been getting these brain lesions that can result in eagle death. So it's just kind of an example of how invasive species can be problematic in a variety of capacities and can really seriously impact native food webs in ways that you can start to see and track up the different trophic levels. So this map shows more of New York State than the Adirondacks because that is more where we're seeing it. So as you notice, there are no orange dots in the Adirondacks, and we're trying to keep it that way. So prevention is the key here. We see hydrilla in the Finger Lakes area. It's in the Cayuga Lake area, the Lower Hudson. It's in Buffalo and Rochester. So this is why it's really important to advocate for and practice those clean, drain, dry principles as folks are moving those watercrafts between regions and bodies of water with different species. There is a native plant that has some characteristics that are similar to hydrilla. So hydrilla is pictured up at the top here, and it has these leaf whorls of 4 to 6 leaves, kind of an average of 5. And the leaf margins have those serrations. So you're looking again, just like with curly pondweed, for those little serrations along the edge of the leaf. One of our native plants that you'll see often if you're out on the water doing surveys and especially rake tosses is Elodea. And while it does have some similar structural characteristics to Hydrilla, the leaf whorls are in 3, so you should be seeing 3. Sometimes it gets a little funky and has 4, but it will not have the same characteristic serrations as Hydrilla. And if you ever are out there and you find yourself, using a magnifying glass trying to determine if it has those serrations or not, and unable to really confirm one way or another, it's another species that definitely take a picture, or you can bag a sample of the species, and we can work through that process together. All right, which brings us to our animals section. So those were our 8 invasive plant species, and now these will be our 8 invasive animal species. All right. So the first animal species is the spiny water flea. So spiny water fleas are these tiny little crustaceans. They're so small, they're almost microscopic, but not quite. As you can see on this photo here with the spiny water fleas on the fingernail. They're from Eurasia originally, and they can really impact the food web because they're able to outcompete the native zooplankton and become the dominant species. So this is particularly problematic because the native fish don't like to eat spiny water flea because they have these very unsavory hooks and spines on them. As you can see from these images, looks pretty formidable. They're also a little bit transparent, translucent, kind of towing that line. So they can be hard to spot in the water, but they can often be found clinging to gear, as you can also see in this photo here of the spiny water flea on the fishing line. This is their current distribution in the APIPP region. So it's currently found in 9 lakes. That includes Sacandaga, Lake Pleasant, Great Lake Sacandaga, Lake George, Piseco, Pex, Lake Champlain, Indian Lake, Stewart's Bridge. So they are here, and they're hard to identify because they're small, and they're a huge part of the reason why we promote hot water decontaminations of boats, so that even if you can't see the species on your boat, it could be somehow connected, hooked on with those little spines, or hanging out in a little bit of water. This here you can see some of those floating spiny water fleas in the bag. So definitely something you want to make sure you're not transporting from one water body to another. And also it's important to note that once they're there, there's currently no way to remove spiny water flea from a lake once it's introduced. So very, very important to focus on that prevention piece. We have another kind of water flea that we monitor for and try to keep reasonably at bay from the Adirondack area, and that's the fishhook water flea. So these are very similar. They also have a long tail with spines, and the fishhook water fleas are about less than a half an inch long, similar size to the spiny water flea with those long, sharp barbed tails. So they're mostly tail. And they have a very slender spine that has a prominent S-shaped loop on the tail. And just like the spiny water flea, they tend to collect in these gelatinous globs that you can sometimes find on fishing equipment and lines. So those characteristics again that you're looking for are the long spine with the S-shape kind of curve at the end. It may be clumping on a fishing line and maybe look or feel like gelatin or a cotton batting with a tiny black spot. That little tiny black spot is something that you definitely want to look for, especially because it's easier to see than the semi-see-through water flea. And this is the distribution map of the water flea, the fishhook water flea. And right now we're only seeing that in Lake Champlain as a confirmed species, but it's also quickly becoming a dominant zooplankton there. And Lake Champlain Lake Champlain is a host to a lot of invasive species. I think it's about 50 invasive plant and animal species at this time. So if you are a person who recreates in Lake Champlain or spends time in and around that water in other ways, it's really important to be conscious of how you're moving your gear and equipment from Lake Champlain to any other water body to avoid spreading any of those 50 invasive species to lakes inland. We're back to our iconic invasive species that's neither a poison ivy or a tomato. This is the zebra mussel. So the zebra mussels are filter feeding freshwater mollusks. They are pretty small. They can be a quarter of an inch to an inch and a half long. They have a very D-shaped kind of characteristic curvature, and they have those light and dark brown stripes, kind of like a zebra. So the zebra mussel larvae are another risk for transport that are very tiny and hard to see, much like the spiny water flea. They're microscopic, and that's another reason that we encourage folks to be careful and practice clean, drain, dry, and not transport even seemingly clean water in bait buckets or live wells because it may contain those little spiny water fleas, fishhook water fleas, or the zebra mussel villagers. As you can see here, they really connect well with the place that they decide to live. So this is a shopping cart here that is completely coated in zebra mussels. This is because they have these byssal threads, which you can also see in the image above the shopping cart that they use to cling to and hold onto surfaces. That's very characteristic of the zebra mussel. So those byssal threads allow them to attach, and they can grow into really absolutely massive numbers. And even on top of native mussels, smothering them, which we have a picture of here. And on top of that, they can do all sorts of infrastructural damage, like clogging intake pipes. So zebra mussels have the ability to enormously change water quality because they are filter feeders. So in large numbers, that can really change the water clarity, which can in turn impact water temperatures as a result of increased sun penetration. So there are a lot of cascading impacts of a zebra mussel population. There are lots of water bodies across the state that have been impacted by zebra mussels, but not so much in the APIPP region, with the exception of Lake George and Lake Champlain. So it's possible that the Adirondack Lakes don't have a high enough calcium level to support the amount of growth that they need for their shells because they have really rapid growth. But it's definitely not something we want to test out, and we are hoping that we don't see them established successfully within the Adirondack interior anytime soon or ever. So we have another type of mussel. This is the quagga mussel, and they do look pretty similar to zebra mussels, which is why they are pictured here side by side. Quagga mussels are also filter feeding mollusks. The quagga mussel has a bit of a more pale appearance and yeah, a similar D-shaped shell. It also has the byssal threads. So those strong fibers used by the mussels to stick to rocks or any surface that they choose to call home. And one of the key differences is just that lighter color of the quagga mussel. And this is our distribution map, which maybe you can breathe a little sigh of relief because we also do not have quagga mussels in the Adirondacks, but they are nearby, so don't relax for too long. They're in Oneida Lake and Lake Ontario, and they're another species that we're working hard to keep out of the Adirondacks. It may again be another factor related to the calcium requirements, but that's something that we're still working to emphasize the prevention piece of these species. We also have the golden clam. So the golden clam is another mollusk. The outside of the shells are yellow-green to brown with elevated, these thick concentric rings. If you were to have one in your hand, you could move your fingernail down the rings and you would feel those levels very, very significantly. It's a good way to test if that's a golden clam in your hand. A lot of the more native species are softer and less bumpy. So also, if the color chips away, you can see white spots underneath, and the underside of the shells may be a light purple. The adult golden clams are usually pretty small, less than an inch and a half in length. This is golden clam distribution currently. We see them in Lake George in a number of locations. This is another one that we can't eliminate once it's established. So this is something that we're still emphasizing prevention, trying to not let it spread from any other water bodies. It's also was located in Lake Champlain for the first time in 2024. So something that we're looking out for and continue to survey for during our AIS monitoring efforts. So, in other parts of the country, golden clam has really made a negative impact on natural ecosystems. Like the zebra mussels, they have the ability to make massive changes in water chemistry and can disrupt food webs and threaten the ecosystem viability. As you can see in these pictures, it's just a very stark monoculture and all of those empty shells and it definitely changes the character of the aquatic system and it's not something that you can remove. So again, with the prevention efforts being really critical to invasive species work. We also monitor for Chinese mystery snails. So mystery snails, the Chinese mystery snails are large when they're fully grown. They're golf ball sized snails, and one of the key characteristics of these snails is their trapdoor or operculum. So these snails are pretty light in color when they're younger, and then they turn to a darker greenish brown, or maybe even a little bit reddish when they're adults, as seen in the picture here. These snails tend to be quite stinky, so they are often noticeable by that when they die. So the empty shells can often be found floating around in small bay areas and collecting along slower shorelines, which is helpful for identifying them. If you ever see a floating shell, definitely check it out. The mystery of the mystery snail is that they give birth to live young. So they have little mini snails. And this makes it possible, interestingly, to accumulate heavy metals such as lead or zinc. So they're not really a great food source for native wildlife or people. This is the distribution map currently that we see as reported in iMap. They're found more toward the northern region of our prism, but they also might be a slightly underreported species, so keep an eye out and make sure to take photos of them when you find them and report them into iMap. A great way to help identify them is to show that trapdoor side. That's a very important characteristic for identifying the mystery snail. So we have also native snails, and they're great. They're a natural part of our ecosystem. But the Chinese mystery snail is a lot larger than those snails and can outcompete the natives. Part of the reason is they aren't picky eaters, and they'll pretty much eat anything they can slide over, including algae and fish eggs. And they tend to have these big boom and bust cycles. So also, these snails can be carriers for parasites. It's not something that we've seen in this area, but they are known to be, and just another reason to, yeah, keep an eye out for these species and be aware of their presence across the APIPP region. The rusty crayfish. It's native originally to the Ohio and Mississippi River Basin drainage area. The rusty crayfish has a couple of good identifying features. We have native crayfish as well, but if you're looking at a crayfish wondering if this might be the rusty, look for those dark rusty red spots on either side of their carapace or their shell. It looks like the crayfish was picked up by someone who had red paint on their thumb and forefinger. Those red spots are very characteristic. It also has black bands on the tip of its pinchers. The claws leave a small oval gap when they close. They don't fully close. And yeah, so it's just something to keep an eye out for while you're near the shorelines. If you see a crayfish, definitely take a closer look and try to hone in on those key identifiers. The adults can be about 3 to 5 inches long. Again, look for those rusty red colored spots on either side of the body and those black tip bands. This is their distribution right now. There are a couple of historic reports of rusty crayfish in the Lake George area. A little bit of uncertainty there about their accuracy, but last summer there was a confirmed population in Auger Lake. So we know that they're here, and it's one that we are looking to update our distribution maps for. So next time you see a crayfish, take a closer look, see if it has those rusty red spots and those black banded claw tips. These are a species that are likely transported by anglers in bait buckets, so either intentionally or unintentionally moving from a water body to a water body and released as a bait item. So another reason to not dump out bait buckets. All right, our last invasive animal is the Eurasian native, the round goby. So this species was originally introduced to the Great Lakes in ballast water and is now found throughout the Great Lakes and is something that we're watching move through the canal systems. And tracking that movement, there are organizations doing that work. They're small, benthic, bottom-feeding fish. They can be up to 10 inches in size, but they're often a little bit smaller. The key characteristics for identifying round goby is the dark spot on the dorsal fin, which you can see pretty clearly in this photo here. And it also has a fused single pelvic fin that helps it stick to the bottom. They also have these very bulging eyes, which are another helpful characteristic. This is their current distribution. Round goby is not currently found in the Adirondacks at this point, not confirmed in the Adirondacks, I should say, but it can be seen all throughout the St. Lawrence, the Mohawk, the Hudson Rivers, and there are partners that we're working with to prevent its movement from the Hudson to Lake Champlain. So it's definitely an up and coming concern and one that we ask folks to keep an eye out for. So interestingly, as a side note, the round goby are known to eat zebra mussels, which at first glance might seem like a good thing, but it actually isn't. So first of all, they don't like to eat them in the sort of capacity that would be needed to use them as a biocontrol to help tamp down those populations of zebra mussels. And also, since zebra mussels are filter feeding all sorts of things, including botulism, their presence creates kind of a favorable environment for that. The feeding of the round goby, they consume the mussels and therefore they're accumulating a concentration of that botulism. So again, that those impacts on the different trophic levels, whereas the zebra mussels have these high concentrations, and then the round gobies consume them, and then that just keeps moving up the trophic levels to larger fish and birds that are feeding on the goby. And yeah, so it's interesting to see those connections even outside of the directly aquatic ecosystem. Our aquatic concerns are not in their own world. It's all connected. Our aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems really rely on each other to be healthy and strong and resilient. So if you were looking at these maps and you got curious and excited about all those distribution data points, and I hope you did, we have a map that pulls that IMAP data and kind of organizes it in a way that meshes with our Lake Protectors Program data. So we have this dashboard, the AIS species distribution map on our website that you can you can look for your specific lake, or you can look up different invasive species, individuals. So you can look up in Eurasian water milfoil and see all of the lakes that are reported to have populations of Eurasian water milfoil. And you can also zoom into lakes that you are familiar with and care about and see what invasive species are nearby in the water bodies next to you. So it's a really helpful tool to learn more about the specific AIS in your pocket of the region, and can also be a helpful piece for messaging about the risks of spread and the importance of prevention within your communities as well with that. Very specific information about what is nearby and what you're at risk for and what your lake already is known to contain. All right. So feel free to share any questions at this point. We're going to move forward into the prevention and best practices portion of the training, and then we will take a little break and jump back into our survey methodology moment. But if you have any burgeoning questions, make sure you send them to the chat and I'll take a minute to look at them. I'm sure we also have other folks in there answering questions too. So make sure you jot them down before you forget about them. But moving forward so that we stay on time, I'm just going to spend a few minutes talking about that prevention piece because we reference it a lot. And prevention is a huge part of the work that invasive species organizations are championing for because AIS is generally spread in three ways. It's spread by moving boats, by boat bait buckets, and by aquarium releases. And the common denominator here is human activity and movement. So the bad news is humans are usually the cause of the spread, but the good news is that if we're causing it, then we could probably stop doing that. So with a little bit of intentionality, we can really prevent a great deal of harm. Specifically in the Adirondacks, people are visiting from all over, and some of those places have really highly invaded waterways. So luckily for us here, we have an amazing fleet of boat stewards working out of the Adirondack Watershed Institute, and they do an awesome job of helping spread AIS awareness. They collect data, and they do inspections and decontaminations to help prevent AIS spread. And what they are helping us do with those decontaminations is practice clean, drain, dry. So it's really important to make sure that when we are done boating, we are making sure to clean everything. So that includes moving any plant or mud or any sort of thing that you see off of your boat, and ideally using hot water to decontaminate it. So that hot water should be about 140 degrees, and a pressure wash or a scrub is key to killing and cleaning those invisible invertebrates such as the spiny water flea or those zebra mussel veligers off of our boats and equipment. Draining is another important part, so making sure to drain all of the water from those compartments. So this happens right after you exit the water while you're still at the launch. So drain those boats before you leave your access site. And that includes your live well if you have one, and making sure not to transport water in your bait buckets. So dispose of that properly in the trash or on land. So drying is the final piece of our clean, drain, dry puzzle, and it's the most effective way to ensure that no invasive species or fish diseases move into new areas. So the drying times kind of vary depending on the equipment and the air temperature, but folks often use hand towels on their smaller watercrafts. You know, if you have a kayak or a canoe or a paddleboard, you can hose that down, dry it off a little bit, leave it in the sun. A minimum of 5 to 7 days in the sun is recommended, or you can use that hot water station to eliminate the drying time. That'll pretty much ensure that you've gotten as much as you can off of the boat with that hot water decontamination and let it dry, and you should be good to go. So another way to decontaminate is with a saltwater solution. We have some incredible partners who have some solution baths to wash gear off and kill those freshwater invasive species. There are a few of them on the west branch of the Ausable River. There's a little bit more information about our different resources for decontamination here. So you can find a map that has all of the AWI decontamination and steward sites online, and you can also find the location of the wader wash stations and those saltwater solutions that are located along the west branch of the Ausable River. So they hold the solution, the brushes, and trash cans for any unused bait. So it's not only the right thing to do, but it's actually the law to clean, drain, dry. And you can also get a certificate proving that you're following this protocol when you visit one of the AWI wash stations. They'll give you a little card from a boat steward that can be presented to anyone who asks to make sure that you're following that protocol and in line with those clean, drain, dry standards. So proper bait disposal is the other piece to this puzzle. We are making sure never to release any of our live bait into waterways or on land. It's just not a good idea to let that out. Making sure that we dispose of any unused bait in the trash and not into water, not onto the land, and making sure to encourage other people to do the same. So if you If you can hand it off to someone else who's just heading out on the water. But if you do that, make sure you check in with them and be sure they have a plan for proper disposal if they don't use it all either. So, making sure to spread the message is another important piece of this. Share the knowledge that you have and help our community of AIS stewards grow. All right. And then if we're not releasing bait, then we really shouldn't release live pets either. This is a good reminder just to not dump anything from an aquarium into the native environment. So sometimes, as you can see here, the aquarium plants have little infestations in them that you might not even notice. So this has zebra mussels on it. If you have something and you're not sure how to dispose of it, there are folks you can contact. You can contact the DEC, you can contact us, and we'll help you work through that process and making sure that it doesn't become a problem. If you have a pet that you're looking to rehome, definitely contact a shelter. And it's just important to consider the long-term plan before finding yourself in that situation to begin with. So making sure that you understand what species you are keeping and what their role is in the ecosystem and making sure to keep them in an appropriate contained environment. All right. And with that, we will take a moment and we can take a breath and we'll answer any questions that you have and take a little bit of a break before we jump into the survey training portion of this. So we'll have a few minutes here. I'll pause the presentation and you can take a break. We'll circle back in about 5 minutes. And if you have any questions, make sure you type them into the chat and we'll make sure to get to those. Thanks for joining us again. We are going to jump into part two of our training, which covers the community science and lake survey methods. So we're glad that you're sticking around for this, and we hope that after going through this portion, you'll be feeling prepared to head out and do a survey for aquatic invasive species in a place that is meaningful for you. So we'll go over these things here. We're going to talk a little bit about what the Lake Protector program is, go over the protocol that we recommend folks use while they're out surveying, talk about how we record and report our findings, and then we'll have a couple of resources to share with you and ways to find more info, and then we'll share a few minutes for Q&A after. So, lake protectors. Our goal with this program is to continue building a community of dedicated, knowledgeable people who can help us in our mission to safeguard Adirondack waters. And it's really a huge effort. We are fortunate to live in a place that has enormous amounts of fabulous waterways. So this volunteer effort is a huge part of making sure we have as many eyes on that water as possible. This volunteer effort has been growing since 2002 into what continues today with you folks being here and joining us. Since it began, we've had hundreds of individuals and families and partners out surveying lakes. Many of them have been surveying the same lakes or one individual lake for many years. So lots of historic data on the invasive species populations in these places. So we're really working to build up that awareness and education component. We provide a scientific framework for collecting environmental data that can be used park-wide. And we're trying to track the absence and presence of aquatic invasive plants and animals, really for the purpose of preventing new introductions, knowing where it is so we know where is becoming more at risk of a new introduction, working on that rapid detection and eradication of new infestations where possible, and then managing those existing priority infestations to help mitigate those negative impacts. So the Adirondacks has a lot of water, as we mentioned. Here are some of those numbers here. So for every water body, it's really amazing to think about how many visitors travel here from across the state or the country with all their boats and fishing gear and paddling kits and whatnot, their camping gear. So we can all play a role in helping mitigate those impacts while keeping this place a wonderful destination for all people to enjoy. It just takes a little bit of extra effort on our part, and we're here today to walk through how we can support those efforts. So it's really important to focus on the monitoring part because it's good to know where we are and in our journey with the invasive species. So, as we can see here on the one side of the screen, we have one purple loosestrife left untreated can really alter habitats, and that's what we are noticing. And one of the things that we talk about a lot is eradication is a really hard thing to accomplish when it comes to invasive species, and it really is most successful when it is very early on. So we focus on the prevention and early detection rapid response part in our Lake Protectors program. So logistically, it's unlikely or impossible to eradicate invasive species in waterways and wetlands that are really highly infested. So once it has a really strong hold in those areas, full eradication is not usually a realistic goal. But in small populations, if you find one invasive plant or a small group of water chestnuts, there is still a chance that you can work towards that eradication. And the best way to be able to get to that point is to find the introduced species early. So monitoring plays a really important role in that early detection, rapid response framework. So this kind of outlines what we're talking about a little bit more. So this is the invasion curve, and it's a graph that shows the invasion process, and kind of illustrates for us that as the species becomes established and spreads within its new environment, it has different levels of impact and our ability to manage that infestation. So after a new species establishes, there may be a short period of days or months, or maybe even if you're lucky, you've got a year or two, during which it's possible still to eradicate it, but before it becomes too widespread to manage. But if a species can't be totally removed, it's still possible to contain it and manage it to a level that allows you to still do the things that are important to you. So there are, even in lakes that have your Asian water milfoil, there are ways to manage it so that you're still able to really enjoy that lake and have a healthy native ecosystem by keeping that population down to what you consider to be a livable amount. So each goal for each lake and each case is very different when it comes to invasive species because no lake is the same and no invasion is the same either. And so it's important to yeah, keep in mind that when we're out surveying, we are playing an important role in that small window of time where if you find a small population, you could still potentially have a chance of eradicating it. And then also, smaller populations are always going to be a little bit more bite size for management to begin with. So the earlier you can become aware of a population, the better it is for your management efforts and the more options you have. All right, so the lake protector process. We like to say the lake protectors go with the flow, and the flow is here. So the first step is attending a training, which we're doing right now, so we're in a good spot. So there are a couple more steps that we're going to walk through, and just a moment to say thanks. I'm glad that you're here, and I'm glad that you're interested in this, and I hope that we will be able to work with you for this summer and summers to come to work on monitoring for invasive species across the park. After you've attended your training, the next step you will take is to select the lake in your life that you would like to survey. So we have a handy dandy map tool that will help you do just that. It's a map that we can find on the Lake Protector webpage, and it just allows you to kind of commit to choosing your lake or lakes if you desire that you will be monitoring this summer. It allows you to see also what other lakes have been adopted. You can use, there's a little filter tool that you can use to search for the name of your lake, and you can find your lake that way. And then once you click on the lake, as you get to that location on the map, you can choose to adopt the lake and fill out a short form, and you will have successfully adopted your lake to survey, which is a nice feeling. And I will be able to also get in touch with you and make sure that you have all the support that you need to make sure that happens this summer. And you'll have lots of resources. So I'm going to send out in a follow-up email the links to all of the resources that I'm mentioning here. And this is one of those links. So the first step, attend the training. Second step, select your lake and sign up to adopt it for a survey. Your next step is once you've selected your lake, to ensure that you're ready to get out there and do the survey. So this part happens on land well before you get out there. We have a sample checklist so you can make sure you have all of the gear and equipment that you need to head out into the field. That includes your boat. You could be a motorboat or a canoe. You'll want to have a map of the lake or the pond. By this time, before you head out, you'll select your data sheet preference. So there are a couple ways we'll go through that, how you can record your data, either a paper copy or online. It's always a good idea to bring paper towels and Ziploc bags for plant samples in case you find something interesting that you'd like to bring back and get a second opinion on or look at later under a microscope or on land. Always a good idea. Also, if you're doing that, bring a Sharpie so you can write on it and help yourself remember where it came from and what you were thinking when you collected it. And it's a good idea too to bring a camera. We find that using polarized sunglasses is really helpful for seeing beneath the water surface. And you may choose to use an aquatic rope. We'll talk a little bit more about that later in the survey process so that you can look beneath the surface and bring some of the plants that might be a little bit out of reach into your hands and you can get to know them that way. So making sure that you're ready to go before you hit the water. Here's a picture of the rake in question that we'll talk about later. And have all of your gear together is important before you head out and start the survey on the water. And most importantly, make sure to double check and be sure that you are safe because that is the most important part. We need to make sure that you come back. So when you head out on the water, make sure you have your PFD. It's really important to have your life jacket. Bring the 10 essentials with you. We have an example of a paddler's safety checklist here on this slide. So reference that and think about if you have those things in your go bag for when you're paddling. And remember to practice leave no trace. So just like when you're hiking, make sure to leave the environment the same or better than you found it. Another important part of paddling, just like when you go on a hike, it's really helpful to let people know where you're going and how long you expect to be gone. So we call these float plans, and that just means letting someone know on shore what your location is, what your plan is, and when you expect to be off the water. And then also making sure you remember to text them or call them or go to their door when you are off the water so that they don't have to worry about you. So just make sure you're safe out there. Safe paddling is the best way to go and makes it more enjoyable when you know you're set and prepared. And another important thing is to remember to clean, drain, dry. So the last thing we want to do when we are heading out to do an aquatic invasive species survey is accidentally transport invasive species in our efforts to monitor them. So double check that your boat has checked all of these boxes and that you are good to go and won't be accidentally introducing invasive species to your beloved water bodies. All right. And once that prep work is done, you are ready to get out on the water. So we made it to step 3. We've done the training, we've signed up, and now it's time to survey. And we'll jump into what that looks like. So when you head out on the water, it's important to kind of get a sense for it, and it'll take a little bit before you probably feel like you could find that line between looking too closely and not looking closely enough. But in general, we say that it's best to search in a smaller area with greater care than a larger area with less care and with less specificity. So if you can only commit to doing a portion of a water body and feel like you have thoroughly searched that area, that is totally an option. You can sign up to monitor a portion of a water body or an entire water body. Both are great options. And it's just better to have people out there looking at all than being overwhelmed by the idea of monitoring an entire lake. So Definitely focus on quality over quantity of your monitoring. And then it's important also to not get lost in the weeds. It's hard to do when you're out there paddling and you're looking for aquatic vegetation and you're just seeing it everywhere. It can feel a little bit overwhelming, but the more you spend time looking at each plant, and if you take a few minutes when you first get on the water to get to know the plants that you're going to see more regularly, you'll probably see lots of Elodea. You'll see some of our lovely native pondweeds. Get a sense for what native plants are around. Notice what they look like in their submersed habitat. So when you're looking down at them from the water. And yeah, make note of what they look like and then try to look for the things that look different than that. So just be really observant, trust your gut. If you see something that looks like a little bit of a different color, or you see something that is growing in a very dense population, that's usually kind of a little bit of a red flag. Take a look over there. Sometimes it's just a really happy native plant, but it could also be an invasive species. And you'll also have the option to go out on the water more than once. So if you want, you can go out one day and do a little survey and kind of practice that in one area. And then if you want to do the second half of the lake or another bay, another day, that is totally fine too. So don't feel like you need to go out there and do the paddling marathon. Just focus on what feels manageable and that you feel like you can do in a thorough way in that visit. So all that we ask is once you've adopted a lake is that you survey it at least once a summer. So that can be from July to September. And the best conditions are on a calm and sunny day when you have good visibility and you can see beneath the water surface to look at those submerged plants. This image here shows kind of the ideal survey protocol. So if you're out on the water, we recommend folks zigzag, do a bit of a meander through the littoral zone. And the littoral zone is the area of the lake that can kind of be defined by the presence of sunlight at that sediment level. So it corresponds with the growth of partially submerged and fully submerged aquatic plant. It's where you're going to be seeing enough sunlight getting to the bottom for those plants to grow. So zigzagging back and forth from shore out into kind of the border of that littoral zone is good practice to see as much as you can and get a good grasp of what vegetation is successfully growing. And all of these little shoreline areas too are great places to look for our aquatic invasive animals. So I would be looking especially along quieter shorelines for those floating Chinese mystery snail shells. When you can have good visibility and look down into the water, you can often see them even in several feet of water because the adults are very large. Same goes for the crayfish, something you should look for at the edge of the water as much as possible. I always, when I am launching into the water, do a quick little shoreline survey before I start. Get a little bit of a bearing on what we're looking at, and sometimes you'll find the uh, aquatic invasive species there too. We're going to pause for a second. We had a little bit of a power outage here. Oh, we're back. That's exciting. All right. Looks like we're back in action. Okay. Well, now that we're back, we have covered our zigzag meander through the littoral zone as the ideal. Make sure when you're launching and out on the water, pay special attention to those inlets and outlets. Boat launches are a good place to look. Marinas, existing native plant beds, and just any part along the shoreline that you can access and you see lots of vegetation growing. All right. And then we also have a little bit of advice for you on the top of the water visual assessment of AIS. So when you're looking for AIS under the water, as I mentioned, polarized sunglasses help. It helps to go slowly, don't be rushed, be observant. And one of the ways that you can get a closer look at what's going on underneath the water, sometimes you can just reach out and touch the plant if it's growing close enough to the surface. But if that's not the case, a rake toss is usually the best way to go. So the rake toss is a great sample collection method, which you can use to find out what plants are in the water just out of reach or in hard to see locations. So we recommend folks do this while they're out on the water if possible. And so you're holding the rake in the boat. It's a garden rake, two garden rakes attached kind of back to back, and tied to a rope. You'll hold on to the rope side, which is something you only hopefully would forget once, but maybe bring two rakes just in case. And then you toss that rake, holding onto the rope end, into the water and do a little bit of a drag across a few feet of the bottom of the lake bed. And once you bring up the rake, you'll be able to see what those plants are that are beneath you or just out of reach or out of sight in the water. And this is a great way to confirm that areas that are a little bit harder to reach are either a presence or an absence for invasive species. So the rake toss is a great way to have those plants in hand and get a closer look at them. And you'll be able to get to know a bunch of the other native plants, hopefully too. When you do this, you'll get a mix of all sorts of vegetation from the bottom of the lake bed. So what happens if you're out there and you do see invasive species? It does happen. So this is where you'll take a moment to record your observation. And photos are a great option, an important part of what we do. So we'll walk through how we recommend you do this. You can take as many photos as you want for your own reference later on, but we also have a couple of data collection methods that help standardize it and feed that data into IMAP and our Lake Protector database. So right now, we'll imagine that we have spotted our invasive species and we are working towards recording it. There are two ways that we do our records. The first way is online. It's a form-based method. It's very easy to use. It's kind of one and done because you're able to use both IMAP and the Lake Protector survey to fill in all of the information about your survey, but also the invasive species documentation as well. So it'll record the location that you found the invasive species, and you're able to input the survey area as well. The paper method is also a viable option. It just requires multiple data sheets, and we'll go over how that looks in a moment. So all of these options, both online and the paper, have to answer these questions. So they have to tell us what you saw, where you saw it, and what it looked like. So the paper forms have one method of doing that. So if you choose the paper form option, I'll send out the links to those documents, and they're always available on the website as well. But it's for three forms, and there's the AIS observation sheet, the aquatic survey sheet, and the paper map. So this is an example of what the AIS observation sheet looks like, and this is used to record that important information of the GPS coordinates, the aquatic invasive species name. It's great if you can include a photo as well, if possible. And you'll also include the invasive species distribution and the size of the area. If you're reporting it into IMAP and just using the paper option, you'll be able to do this part later. You won't be doing that in the field. All right. And if you're choosing the paper map option, there are a few ways you can go about that. Probably the easiest way is just use a simple base map from Google Maps or any other map service that you like to use, Avenza, and you can print that out and mark the location of the AIS that you found there. So you can see on this little example map, we've got a 1 and a 2 marking the two places that the invasive species were located. On those data sheets, there are a couple of different terms. I mentioned invasive species distribution. So beyond just saying present or absent, we also talk about invasive species in terms of density. So we have a couple of terms that we use to describe that: trace, sparse, dense, and the monoculture large bed. of invasive species. These photos do a pretty good job of illustrating the example-ish of what we're looking for. It's not going to be perfect, and this is another example. You don't have to get too lost in the weeds with defining it, but here are the general categories that we use with the percentages to kind of give you a visual and help you feel more comfortable with that concept. So trace is we usually refer to a less than 5% of invasive species in the area that you have confirmed the invasive species to be in. So this little illustration shows what that would look like. Sparse is 5 to 25%. Dense is 26 to 75%, and this is one example of what we might consider dense. And this is another one. So this is where photos can be really helpful in providing that additional context and kind of recognizing that these categories are just helpful for helping us understand what we're looking at, but they don't have to be perfect because it's a large window, 26 to 75%. And then the monoculture or the large bed is a huge percent cover of 76 to 100%. So that's almost nothing but the invasive species. We also ask folks to record the size of the area where the AIS is present. So that can be used in these terms typically. So we talk about it in terms of up to 10 square feet, up to a half an acre, up to an acre, or more than an acre. And again, this is kind of just an estimation based on your best understanding of what is going on in that area. So once you've done your survey, you'll go back to shore safely and make sure to text your on-shore contact or give them a call, let them know that you have successfully done your survey and you're off the water. And then it's time to fill out and complete your paper map and your aquatic survey data sheet if you're choosing the paper option. So with that paper map, you could see again that we have marked where the invasive species are with the 1 and the 2. And then we also have the searched area marked on the map too, just so that we know, looking at this, this is the area that you surveyed specifically. So this would be what we would call a partial water body survey. And it covers a good portion of the shoreline. And making sure we know where you went is important information regarding the invasive species distribution, so that we know that we just didn't get a look closer to the Baker Mountain Trailhead this time, and maybe we'll circle back there next week or next year. This is what the aquatic survey data sheet looks like. So to accompany that map, you'll also fill out this paper sheet that records the other important information about your survey. So that includes, the list of the volunteers that were participating, and also all of the information about the water body. So we'll talk about the AIS that was searched for, the name of the water body, the location, whether it was a partial or a total water body survey, what type of survey method was used, if you used a rake or if you were using the top water method, just looking out over the water, or if you brought a view scope in and were peeking underneath the water. There's also a place here to record any additional comments regarding the weather or access or other survey day conditions that you think are worth noting. So again, this is that first part of the survey. The first thing that you'll fill in is your name, your contact info, the organization, if you are affiliated with one, and the other volunteers that were with you that day. It's important then you see two columns. One is for the AIS that you're searching for, and then the AIS that you detected. So if you went out and you felt confident in identifying maybe a handful of the species, or you just wanted to do a vegetation survey, then you would check off all of those plants that you felt confident that you were looking for out on the water. And then the second column is for the AIS that you detected. So you would check those boxes if you did locate any of those invasive species on the water, or check none if there were none located. And this is a close-up of that second part. So you'll have the date, you'll have the water body name, you'll have the location, a little bit, there are a lot of ponds that have similar names and lakes, so it's important to narrow that down a little bit with a town or the county. And then you'll give some of the water body characteristics. You'll talk about what type it is, what the daily use looks like, and what survey methods you used. Just fill in that information to record what your experience was on that water body. You'll also see there's a chance to record if you entered any species into iMapInvasive. So if you do find aquatic invasive species out on your survey, we ask that you do enter it into iMapInvasives. We'll show you how that works in just a moment. So if you have chosen that option, going with the paper data sheets, that is all you need to do. So you fill out those data sheets and make sure to include your map, and you can mail them to APIPP, or you can choose to scan them and email them if that works easier for you. So that is the paper data sheet option. If you have any questions about that, or if you go out and do your survey and are working through that process and have questions, absolutely reach out and we can work through that process together and make sure that those records are on file, because it's the important final piece to the puzzle. It's great if you can get out there and do the survey, but it's really, really important that we get documentation of that survey so that we know what hard work you put in and we can keep a record of that lake status. So the other option is the online option. So we use this option. It's often a little bit faster and can be simpler depending on the scenario for submitting the surveys. Just like the paper option, all the materials are available on the Lake Protectors site, and I'll also send them out in an email after this training. So the online option has the exact same questions as the paper forms. It has the AIS data sheet in the form of iMaps. So you'll just, instead of filling out your AIS observation data sheet with the GPS coordinates, the iMap app can collect that for you when you are out in the field and select add observation, which we're just going to walk through now. And then the aquatic survey data sheet is just an online form. You can fill it out on your computer or on your phone and just submit that whenever you have service. All right, so the iMap app, which we've heard a lot about iMapInvasives today. It's a really, really important part of the invasive species realm. It helps us keep an updated list of where the invasive species are and also the management and other important details regarding them. So if you do have the iMapInvasives app, this is a great tool to use, and we recommend folks use this whenever they encounter an invasive species out in the field. So it's pretty easy to use, pretty intuitive once it's downloaded. It uses your GPS and your camera, so you can share that location and a photo of the invasive species. And then once your observation is confirmed, that data will be shared, and it could show up next year on our training map when we're looking at the distribution of species. You may notice a little orange bubble where your observation came in. So it's really important, and there are lots of folks out there who are contributing to this data all the time. So it's cool to be a part of that. So when you have the app downloaded, you're able to use it pretty quickly in the field. If you have the app and have created your account, all you have to do is select Add Observation on your screen, on your phone. This is the mobile version. And it will guide you through taking a photo. You can either take a new photo, or if you already have a photo that you really like of the invasive species, you can use that from your library. It'll give you the option to select the species name, and it'll fill in the observation date for you. It will also collect your location, which is really helpful and can save you some legwork later on if you're trying to track that down. And you'll be able to select a project. It's helpful if you can select the APIPP Volunteer Lake Monitoring Project in there, so we know what the context is for the survey. And then you don't have to add an organization, it's optional. You'll see again, like we referenced before, the option to add in additional information, such as the time searched. You don't necessarily have to put that in unless you want to, that's fine. And then you'll put in the size of the area and the distribution of the invasive species as well. So remember, that's we talk about that in terms of square feet or a half an acre or an acre in terms of size of the area, and distribution is that trace, sparse, dense category that we were working through before. You'll also have the option to add comments if you have additional comments to add. And then once you have that report, you'll see it on your screen when you open up the iMap app. You'll see it just like here with the fake species for testing, except it will likely be a real one. And in order to upload this observation, you'll need to select it and make sure it has that little blue checkbox in the observation line. And then you'll go up to the menu in the upper left where those three stacked bars are, and you'll be able to select upload selected, and that will send your observation in. You can only submit these when you're connected to Wi-Fi or to service, but you can record your observation. You can have it in your box waiting to submit it even without service. So that's the beauty of using IMAP. You can collect that information and then submit it later on. And then the aquatic data sheet, the online version, it's just exactly like the paper version, except you don't have to scan it or mail it. You can just fill it out online, either on your computer or on your phone. And it includes the map inside of the survey sheet. So this image here shows what that looks like, and I'll send this out in our follow-up email so you can take a look at it and also fill it out when you have completed a survey if you choose this option. So after you have recorded and reported, you are all set. If you have any questions, make sure to send them along, whether that's now or if that's during the process while you're going through it and working to send in those records of your survey. But that means you have reached step 5, and you have completed the 5 steps of the Lake Protectors program. So after you have recorded and reported, you have successfully accomplished the cycle for the year, and you could become part of the community that does this annually and keeps coming back and building up that database and keeping eyes on the water. Maybe even adding a lake or two to your survey list next year. And it's a really important part of what we do, working with each other to keep our data up to date and working to monitor and learn more, spread awareness about invasive species. So as I said before, APIPP is always here to support at any point during this process. So if that's during the sign up, the survey, the record, or the report, happy to help you through that and provide support where it is helpful. And part of that will be in terms of providing those resources for you. So I've referenced a lot of them today, and I will send them all directly to you so that they're easy to find and easy to use. So this includes the website. We'll send you the link to the Lake Protectors website where you can find all of this information at any time. So that includes all the data sheets. We have past PowerPoints. We'll have this PowerPoint available and videos, other links to resources to help you feel comfortable. There's also a great species section, invasive species section, where you can look at other photos of the invasive species that we've talked about today and learn a little bit more about them. There are some great summaries, so I encourage you to check that out as well. There's also a lake protector manual that's available, and it has step-by-step instructions. If you like to read through things and look at things in front of you, that's a good option if you're a visual learner like that. And that is on the website, and I'll make sure to link that in our follow-up email. It includes identification keys and fact sheets and background information about the program. So these are all the things that are coming to you. You'll have the link to the lake adoption web map, which is that important step 2. You select your water body to monitor. I'll send PDFs of all the data sheets to print out if you want to use them. I'll send links to sign up for the iMap app, walk you through that process, whether you are working to download it for the first time or if you just want a refresher on how to use it because you already have it on your phone, but it's just been a year. And also the links to entering data online, as well as the recordings of this workshop. Another thing that I want to mention is we do have rakes available at the office that we can lend to you if you are interested. A lot of folks end up making their own because they just like to go out there and use them year after year. But we have a little rake library that we're happy to share with you. And if you reach out to me, I can help coordinate that and make sure you have a rake to borrow so you can get a look under the water surface and get to meet some of those plants that might be lurking a little bit out of reach or a little bit out of view. I would also encourage you to, take a look at the website as a whole. There's the Lake Protectors page, but there's lots of other great information on there. Our website just got a refresh, so it's looking new and sharp and a lot faster than it used to be. And we have lots of videos and webinars that are linked on the website and some on YouTube. And we share updates on social media as well. If you'd like to stay up to date with our upcoming events and programs, that's a good place to look. On our website, we have outreach materials that you can browse and you can also place an order for. So you can submit an order for these pamphlets and these posters and these guides, and we will mail them to you. And you can share them with these hard copies of these resources to your interested groups or organizations as you see fit. And also, I would like to encourage you to join me in the near future this summer. We have a couple of trainings on the schedule. And if you really enjoyed this one and would like to meet some of the native and invasive plants in person, these are a really great opportunity to do that. So on July 8th, there's a training, an in-person training in Blue Mountain Lake. It's from 5 to 7, and it's at the Blue Mountain Lake Fire Hall. We'll have lots of species samples on hand so you can get to see them and touch them and get to know some of those key characteristics in person, which is great. And I'll also do a little refresher on the survey protocol, including how to submit that data after the survey is complete. We also have a paddle, a little plant tour planned on Browns Tract Inlet, and we're doing that in partnership with the Northern Forest Canoe Trail. We're doing that in the morning at 9 o'clock at the Racket Lake Boat Launch. So that is scheduled for July 22nd with a rain date of July 23rd. Definitely keep an eye on our events page for more information about those things. And I have one more training on the schedule for our lake protectors this summer in Cranberry Lake, and that will be from 5 to 7 at the Cranberry Lake Fire Hall. So I hope to see you there. The species, having them on hand in the workshops is a great way to get more experience and feel more comfortable identifying both our friendly native species and the invasive species. So I hope to see you there. Make sure you can check out our events page and register for those events on our website. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me personally as well, or the program director, Brian Green, who's been actively answering your questions in the chat. So a big thanks for his involvement there. So please reach out. Our emails are listed on the screen here. If you have questions or if you're interested in learning more about the Lake Protectors program or any of our other volunteer programs or efforts, please be in touch. And I just want to say a final thank you. So without your help, we would have a lot less eyes on the water, and we really appreciate your passion and your dedication to helping us care for the incredible water that we have in this area. And yeah, so it's great. I hope I get to meet a bunch of you in person this summer, and I look forward to receiving documentation of your AIS survey work. It's always exciting to see, and I love the pictures that you send with your surveys, so keep them coming. We'll have a few minutes here. If you want to come off mute and ask questions, this is the time to do it. We can chat. We've got looks like about 10 minutes left. Or maybe all your questions are answered, and that's wonderful.
And I did see a question in the chat, kind of about if people have questions, like they collected a sample and they're like unsure what a plant is, like what should they do?
That is a great question. There are a couple of things you could do. You can take pictures of them and send them to us, send those pictures to us. We also have folks mail us plant samples. So that's where those paper towels come in handy. If you have a little plant species you want to mail into me, make sure that it stays a little bit damp. You can dampen a paper towel, wrap the plant in that, put that in a little Ziploc baggie, write me a note, tell me what you're thinking, where it came from, who you are, and then pop it in the mail. That works too.
Another helpful hint is because Ann and I get sent these photos all the time. A really good step is if you could like these plants come from water, so if you can like float them in like a small like Ziploc bag or like a small tray of water, then that helps a lot better than if you're just like picking the plant up and it just all collapses on everywhere. So we can't really see if are they feathered like leaves or do they have bladders on it? So floating them in the water is a good tip. Also, another useful tip that I recommend many people um, are on water bodies that are nearby that have boat stewards. these boat
Mhm.
stewards have been trained on how to identify aquatic invasive species. So if you happen to be nearby one of them, you could take one of those plants to them and say, "Hey, I found this in this lake. Does this look like Eurasian water milfoil, or does this look like hydrilla?" And then hopefully they can help you. But once again, Anna and myself are here. But the boat stewards are also a great resource we have all across the Adirondacks.
That's very true. And also, I'll add to if you're submitting photos, it's also helpful if you add something to show scale. Like, so put a quarter in there or put something in a ruler so that we can see how large it is, because that's often very helpful too. That's important context.
Anna, do you want? There's another question in the chat about.
Oh, yes. Okay. iNaturalist. So iNaturalist is a great tool. I think it's more useful for terrestrial plants. It just has more data for terrestrial plants. In general, the aquatic species get a little less spotlight, and I have found it to be not particularly accurate with the aquatic ID. It could be a good tool. You could test it and see if it can get you maybe in the right ballpark. Maybe it'll get you the family, but it rarely is the best tool for aquatic invasive ID or even native ID. But there are some really good guidebooks, and we have some resources on the website that can help you. We have some little ID cards for species, and I can send you advice on what books to use, some field guides if you're interested in doing ID out in the field. Any other questions?
Hi, I had a question. Um, how have lakes been doing in terms of when they've found invasive species to use some of the aquatic herbicide treatments? Has that been successful at all? And where would people find out more information about that if they have a large infestation?
Yeah. So I think I mentioned earlier, each lake is unique in its situation, depending on what invasive species it is, its own specific lake ecology, and therefore every management approach is going to be a little bit different. So it's helpful to chat with other lakes who maybe have similar invasive species challenges, but understanding that their approaches will probably be slightly different than even the lake next to it based on their different goals and their different options. There are some lakes who have used the herbicide treatments and they have, it's one of the tools that is available. So we talk a lot about the various ways you can manage Eurasian water milfoil and other aquatic invasive species. And herbicides is one of those tools. There's also that, mechanical management. So removing it with a machine. You can also focus on removing it in a manually. You can do that with by hand. So often you'll find that lakes that are doing management are not just doing one thing, and that's true with the chemical management as well. It's a piece to a puzzle, and it can be a good tool for some lakes in some situations, but it is also something that isn't done alone and requires a lot of planning ahead of time and follow up as well. And we can share some resources with you if that's what you're interested in. You can reach out and we'll get you connected. Brian, I don't know if you want to chime in on this. Feel free.
Great summary, Anna. Yeah, there's lots of people around that are good resources. So reaching out to
Mhm.
us at APIPP. There's also private contractors and companies that have experience doing this. So the first step is generally good to reach out to an expert, and then they can kind of talk to you about it. And once again, like Anna said, we're big believers in integrated plant management. So it's not, do I do chemical management or do I do mechanical management? It's no, you have to do all of the above. It's doing using different tools at different times in different places. And so, with most of these species, like our common species like Eurasian water milfoil or water chestnut, variable leaf, milfoil, the goal is not to, you are not going to be able to eradicate them. So we're just trying to suppress the populations to a level that they are not negatively impacting the ecology or the local economy or the enjoyment of the lake. And so, it's a long-term process to do this. We have many lakes that are doing it very successfully. We have some lakes that are struggling with it, and kind of depends on a lot of what resources and different things they have. But that's why that prevention message of clean, drain, dry is the most important, because if you can keep these invasive species out, that is the most cost effective and best thing. So you don't have to spend all the time and effort trying to manage them. And I like to remind people, it's not binary. It's not like it's like, oh, we're either invaded or we're not invaded. Even if you have Eurasian water milfoil or water chestnut or zebra mussels, there can be something else, and there can be something else that's worse. And so that prevention message needs to go on there. And then the other part about it is, this early detection, rapid response. So if we find plant species early, that gives us a much better chance of being able to manage them successfully. So that's where lake protectors come in, and they're key. Uh, the vast majority of times now, when we're hearing about new invasives, they are coming from um, they're coming from members of the public, people just like yourself. So this is why what you do is so important. And we hope you go out and adopt a lake and fill out a report for lake protectors and get to do your part to help steward our amazing water bodies in the Adirondacks.
All right, we have one more minute if you have any questions that you'd like to bring up, but you can always send us a message after if you've thought about it for a little bit and think of something afterward. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm happy to see some familiar faces and some new ones on this call, and I look forward to working with you this summer and hopefully for many summers to come. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions or would like some support during any point of the process. But what you did today by attending this training should set you up well for success to start that journey. And hopefully, we'll get some new lake protectors out on the water and some new water bodies adopted this year. And the Adirondack region will be better off for it. So, thank you very, very much. And I hope that you will be in touch.